Rodney Miracle. Worked for Christian Appalachian Project for 44 years, give or take a little time. But I started out in Lancaster in the print and letter shop, and then from there I worked in fundraising and in special events, and worked in incoming mail, and then ended up last few years in Mount Vernon in facilities. Well, I graduated high school in '77, in the summer of '77, and jobs weren't plentiful in the area. And I had a sister that was working over there in Lancaster, and she told me that they might need somebody in the print shop, letter shop, and I went over there and applied and graduated on Tuesday and went over there on Wednesday and started working. Because when I started, I thought, well, I'll do this for a while, and but I think God knew I needed that in my life to help me make me into the person He wanted me to be, and that had a big influence on me. And it was, once I got accustomed to what CAP was and what they were doing, and it made it more than a job. It made it a feel-good type thing, and good to be a part of that. I think there were 33 paid employees when I started at CAP, and it was just like a little family. The letter shop, print shop was behind the Catholic church there, St. William, so we worked in basically just almost a barn. When we worked there in behind the church, Biden was still there in that area, and he was in and out, so we ran into him a lot. And me and a friend of mine were up to the rectory one day, walked up to use the restroom, like I told you, had to go to the bathroom, and Father came by to change clothes, and he left his collar laying on the table, and of course the guy that I was with, he had his collar on, and Father walked out, and that was kind of funny. He's like, "Fritz, you think you found a new collar?" And he's like, "Yeah." So it was stuff like that, it was to know him on a personable level, it was neat. The significance of what he saw in those early years as it grew was the ability to provide the jobs for the local area. And I think he did a good job of doing that. I know a lot of the people that I crossed paths with that those jobs provided, it changed their lives. Early on, after we moved to the facility on Crab Orchard Street, where everybody was in the same building, there was a chapel there, and we had daily prayer. So we would share, donors would write in with prayer requests, and then we would share those letters, and then people brought their concerns here, what's going on in my life. So we did know, it was pretty intimate at times about what was going on, and you knew stuff, and you prayed about stuff, and you did make them feel like a family. We did go out to programs, we got stories, we talked to participants, we went to see what was going on in home repair or wherever they were working at, and got pictures, got stories, and talked to the people. I always enjoyed it because you get to get out and actually see the people that you're helping firsthand. And one of the guys that I worked with had an interesting story that they went to a lady's house that they felt like needed some help, and her home was not in the greatest shape. And it's always hard to breach that subject if somebody's not asking for it. And they were trying to talk to her and tell her who they were and what they did. And she said, "Oh, you're from Christian Appalachian?" And they said, "Yes." And said, "Oh, you help people in need?" And they're like, "Yeah, this is going to be okay." She understands. And she goes and gets some 3 or 4 jars of green beans that she can, and says, "I didn't have a real good year in the garden, but maybe somebody can use these." So it was neat to see that, because even though she needed help desperately herself, she still had that within her that I need to help somebody. So that was neat. See the way some of them are living, and then to be able to be a part of turning that around. And always struck me was there was a special tie to the land with those people in Appalachia. it's hard to describe, but there's ties there. Their grandfathers or their grandmothers were there, and they, sometimes on the surface it makes more sense to just leave and go somewhere else. But if you understand them, you understand that ties there. Maybe their mom and dad or their grandparents are buried behind there, and they just don't want to leave it. So it's. I think that early settler sentiment is if you had land, you always had something, and that's how they still. It's ingrained in them that I need to stay on this land. So that was kind of neat. But to be able to help them to live out that last of that memories and stuff that hey, my grandfather built this house, and now that I've got a bathroom and running water, I can stay in here till I'm gone. So meeting them on the level that they are was important. I guess being from the area and parents, grandparents migrating down here, that was first one of the westward part movement. I guess most of them came from Bell County and Harlan County, and so you had a somewhat of a tie to that area. But I think just knowing where they were, meeting them where they were, not like coming in like we're going to save you, but they need to see you on that level. That is what always struck me, is not to be like you're better than them. One year we were doing the fundraising for WorkFest, the spring break where they come and work on homes. I remember it usually you have some bad weather during that time, and it snowed 2 or 3 inches, and it was cold and windy, and it was like 18 degrees. Those college kids were out there putting the roof on, and I told the guy, I was like, you couldn't get a contractor to come out and work in this, but they're doing that because they want to help. And I wrote a piece for a fundraising letter from that what does a donor from New York and a college student from Notre Dame and a elderly lady in Appalachia have in common, and that how those three pieces came together that day, and it God's got to be in that, or it's not happening, And I was like, it just struck me as how you could tie all that together. That lady, the donor, she may never see that house, and those kids, will come and do that roof, and then that lady that lived there reaps the benefits of it. So it was pretty neat. I actually, from direct mail fundraising, I went into Plan Major Gift fundraising, where you actually go and visit donors and tell them what's going on with CAP, and visit churches and talk about what CAP's doing. And so I've done a little bit of everything. It's definitely different. It's a one-on-one thing when you get to that, from direct mail versus we're mailing all this stuff and hopefully we get returned. But when you're doing Plan Major Gift, you're physically right there, just you and them, audience of 1 or 2. And so that was a little different. But you're able to share a little more intimate about what's going on. I think God put me there because He wanted me to be part of my growth and my upbringing, and as I grew up there, it was around me, and it kept me grounded and made me a better person because of it. But I just think, sometimes we take that for granted, that you've got a job where you can see both sides of that spectrum. You see people on both ends of it. When I worked in major gift fundraising, you visit the programs, you see people that are struggling to get through another day, and then you visit donors that are capable of writing a check that will change their life. So you see both ends of that, and then I'm somewhere in the middle, just trying to tie those two pieces together. I kind of got tired of traveling, so there was an opening in at that time they were still in Lancaster, where the donations come in, and they needed somebody to oversee that, take care of all those gifts and all that. So I did that for 5 or 6 years, I guess, something like that. And then I seen another end of the, you see the beginning and how the envelopes are made, and then and letters put together, and then on this end I'm seeing the return from that. So it was kind of neat. Went full circle. A lot of those ladies that worked in there, it was mostly females. They were there in the beginning. I mean, they were there when, a lot of them didn't even have transportation. They'd go get them, pick them up, bring them to work. They were willing to do whatever they needed to do to make sure that that money got to the bank and accurately and safely. And I always said, from that experience, those early ladies that were willing to put that time in and do what was necessary had as much to do with Cap's growth as Father Biden did, because they were willing to stick it out and behind the scenes, and even though they didn't get the prestige or glory, but they made it happen. And it was good to be a part of that on that back end of that. I went to Mount Vernon. They had transitioned out of Lancaster, so ended up in Mount Vernon, and Cap had a lot of properties over half the state, I guess, and just kind of helped take care of that end of it. Keep them functioning, and that put me back out on the road in the field. And it was neat. It was a different part of the organization, but I got to be out, and I got to visit all the programs, and just to think back on how it was when Father was starting. They needed a bed. Maybe it was a door and 4 cans of beans that gave them something to sleep on, and then how far we've came, from that. We still think that central message has to be there, that we're, helping people help themselves, and that God has got to be in it. It's one of our donors that came and worked on. He would come and work on homes, or if we needed to, or if Cap had a building project going on, and his statement was, just find out where God's at and go there. So I always thought that was pretty neat. I hope that they'll continue to be able to help people, and I guess the one thing there's never going to be that magic bullet that helps. So you do the one thing at a time approach, and that's the philosophy I always use. There's always going to be some people that know how to skirt the system. If you're doing Christmas baskets or whatever, but then there's always that one, if there's one family that truly is in need, and you're able to help that one family, then that kind of washes all the rest of it out. And I think the other thing is that always impressed me was in the early days, and I'm sure it's probably still that way, the sacrifice that some of the donors make because being a part of that, and being a part of seeing those letters, and I'm doing without my medicine, so I can send you $10, and we have to keep that focus. That's where that money comes from. Somebody's, in a lot of cases, somebody's sacrificed so you can have that money. So it's to be good stewards falls back on us. Poverty's everywhere. So sometimes you're dealing with a donor that may be in the same boat as the people you're trying to fix their house for, and they're giving $10, and they're sacrificing to give you the $10. So that's where the stewardship really has to come up, because part of you wants to say, send that back to them. They need it as bad as, but then you also realize that that's part of people's makeup, that God puts that in people to have, just like those lady with those green beans. She didn't have nothing, but she was willing to share what she had. So in a sense, you're helping them live out their ministry too by doing that. But it puts a bigger responsibility on you to be a good steward from that. I think helping you to see how God works in everybody's life, if you'll let him, he can work in you as an employee, or he works in the donors, and he works in the participants, and he works in the volunteers, if they're all on the same page, that seeing that God thing, that we called it work. So that was, to me, I think, then it becomes more than a job, as you're seeing that. You're living that out. So that chapel service that we had in Lancaster, we prayed through things, and we saw things happen and God worked there. It was almost like a little church sometimes, and a lot of things got prayed for and finalized through that little chapel thing. So I think, God uses all those little pieces to put it together to make things happen. And I'm thankful for giving me that opportunity to let me grow and grow up there. I mean, 18 years old, and thought I knew everything, but able to grow up and see God work and be a part of that. And thankful that it's survived a lot of crises. Certainly remember when Father Biden was moved out east from here, we thought probably the end, and it opened those doors out there for growth. And then certainly when he passed away, but it still continues to be that force. So that's a good thing. Somebody told you the story of Father Biden. I think it was Yatesville. He had a houseboat, and he took them nuns out on it and run them on a sandbar. And they were from Lexington. I can't remember they had a school, and the guy, the priest or the principal of the school, I guess, calls down there and it's like, I don't have any of my teachers. He's like, the guy that was president at the time, Mike Sanders, he was from up there, and he's like, I know where they're at. And he had run that thing up on a sandbar and had all them nuns on there with him. It was the right time and the right person and the right thing to make it be what it is today. Because those early days were, if he'd have tried to do CAP like you would have to do CAP now, it would never have made it because of different restrictions and different things. And, I was driving a CAP truck to work when I was working in maintenance, and stopped to get gas, and a boy was there that, and he's like, hey buddy, he said, I ran out of gas. He said, you care to run me back to my vehicle? And I was like, I can't, because I can't put, and that kind of hit me because, we are what we are, but because of insurance and lawyers, we can't be what we are, And I apologized. I told him, I said, if I was in my truck, oh, I understand. And you got Christian on your door. And I'm like, I know.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
But I'm thinking, back to that. I'm like, Father Biden would have probably took it. But that's just the way things change, Yeah. But that's when it really hit me, that how much it's changed. But it was all good. You get it. He had a good heart, and his heart was in the right place. And he was doing what God put him on earth to do. So that's all we can do. So been a lot of water under the bridge, under the boat, I guess. It was good. We got along. We had a good time, and we got done what we needed to do. But we also found time to have some fun in that, and I just tried to. I think, if you can brighten someone's day and make someone laugh, you're sometimes that's what they need, because life can get pretty stressful, and sometimes it's good just to laugh, and that's kind of how I felt like maybe that was part of my ministry to help people see humor in things and try to stay out of trouble with HR.